Good evening from the Gail Lemron Auditorium on the campus of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. On behalf of President John Watrette, welcome to the President's Speaker Series. I'm Marc, moderator for the first of our fall series events. The story is remarkable. Men who were denied their right and privilege to defend the country, brave men who wanted to but were prohibited originally from flying. 355 pilots, 80 killed, 32 were prisoners of war. In Tuskegee, Alabama, it was 300 miles from virtually everywhere. Kids 19, 20, and 21 full of flight who wanted to do whatever they had to find their way into the sky, despite the fact that they were unwelcomed, they were unappreciated, and very misunderstood. Tonight, we have two of those pilots, Red Tails, with us. We're going to introduce them, plus bring on the Vision of Flight's Mike McKenzie, who makes part of our discussion, and introduce you to some dignitaries who have joined us for the discussion and the questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you two American bona fide heroes, Lieutenant Colonel Leo Gray, first. Lieutenant Colonel George Hardy. The Red Tail pilots flew P-39s, P-40s, T-47s, B-51s, and the coveted P-51, clearing the skies for bombers and eventually helping to win the war. Joining us in the discussion tonight is Mike McKenzie, who is with the Vision of Flight, who helps to inspire young people to come into the world of flight through his program. He joins us as well tonight in the President's Speaker Series. Mike, thanks for being here as well.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
For those who are not experienced with the Vision of Flight, Mike, tell us a little bit about the program. How long has it been around?
Well, the program itself has been around since 2012. We officially commissioned it then, and we put it in full effect after the monument was erected in regards to the Red Tail pilots that sits at Orlando, at the Orlando Science Center. So pretty much 2012 we started, touched it a little bit, and then we went full force 2014. And I'm glad to say that Embry-Riddle's been a big part of where we've been so far, and looking forward to future endeavors.
Now, how are they funded so they can operate?
Vision of Flight basically relies on donations and charitable giving that comes from great people in the community, as well as great institutions like, of course, Embry-Riddle. We work with kids and giving and using flight as basically the catalyst for early learning and development. We're also a part of National STEM Initiative, which is a tour visiting 6 cities yearly and engaging kids through flight to inspire learning. And we're teaching them things about, through simulation, mathematics, things about aviation, airspace, and we generally incorporate various other partners along with us on that ride. Airline pilots, we're trying to get a couple of astronauts aboard in the camp, and engineers, and people in the sciences.
And there's a website so our folks can follow you?
Yes, visionofflight.org, all the 3 words spelled out.
Now, how did you come to know these two guys?
That's a story that...
because you got an honor, I think, what, a year ago or so? This man made you an honorary member of a squadron or a crew.
He made myself and that gentleman over there, Mr. Sid Levy, we are both honorable Red Tail pilots through the commission of the Red Tail pilots. So.
When did you all meet? We'll get some background, and they're going to tell stories of their missions, but how did you all meet?
Well, it was 2011, and I happened to...
Before that.
Huh?
It was before that.
No, it was 2011.
It's a Fantasy of Flight.
Yeah.
Before that.
So that was before that?
Yeah.
Oh,
that
geez.
was about 2000.
See, his memory is better than mine. And, you know, but to make this story really short, I met Colonel Gray along with, I think, 4 other gentlemen Mr. Brown was there.
Roscoe
Brown.
Brown, Hiram Mann.
Hiram Mann,
Lee
who,
Archer.
rest in peace.
Lee Archer was there.
Lee Archer
Archer,
wasn't
yeah.
there that time. He had just passed away.
I replaced him.
You were there, though, and I got to meet them. And it just happened that at that very time that I met these red tail pilots, and I got to hear the stories around Tuskegee. Now, I knew a lot about the Tuskegee Airmen from just growing up as a kid. My fascination with flight commenced when I was 10, 12 years old. I've been into that stuff, but Colonel Gray, we had a discussion, and we were speaking about some of the things that were coming up. And one was the big reunion that these gentlemen that served overseas was actually having in Orlando. And at the time, I owned a business in Orlando, and I asked him if there's anything I could help him with in preparation for that event. Please feel free to contact me. And he was putting some things in his trunk of his car, and I was helping him out after they had just finished the symposium at Fantasy of Flight in Polk County. Everyone knows Kermit Weeks. And so they just finished doing the symposium there. We had this special opportunity to have lunch with the airmen, which for me, this was like, a dream come true. I attended that, and we had gotten to have this personalized time. I got to have so many of the questions that I've pondered for many years answered, and as well, I got to learn more about them. And this gathering that was taking place was in Orlando. Colonel Gray says to me, yeah, you could help me get a monument. So I looked at him as, what do you mean, help you get a monument? So we went into this discussion about it for a little bit, and I said, yeah, it sounds doable. Maybe we can find a way to get a monument. Well, I didn't understand at the time what I was putting myself into, but I realized that it was something that I had accepted, this challenge to get this monument. And I went on this crusade to see this come true. I did a lot of research, a lot of just learning about the history around not only the Red Tails, but about Tuskegee and the project in general. And I realized in my military days, we always give accolades to the various groups for things that were done. So I wanted to start this trend.
Okay.
And that got me on a flight, which led me to Mr. Levy, which helped me to make this thing all possible.
And Mr. Levy, we're going to come to you in a moment as well and bring the two of you into this. George, if I'm not mistaken, you got your pilot's license before you got your driver's license. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us of that experience.
What do you mean? Get it?
When did you first think you were going to be able to do this?
Well, I graduated from pilot training in September '44. I flew the P-40 transition at Tuskegee, then went to Waldoboro flying the P-47. And then one day, I come down from flying, and one of my classmates, Anders, he had a car, an old LaSalle. LaSalle was between a Cadillac and a Buick. And he got it in New York, where behind the driver's seat there was a bar. And after that, there were 2 jump seats. I guess some of the mafia had that where the guards would ride in the jump seats. It was a long car. And he said, George, you haven't driven that. And so I drove that. It had that stick shift here. I drove it back to the barracks. I was flying the P-47 then. We were getting ready to go overseas. And so that's the way it was in those days in cities like Philadelphia, New York, Boston.
Mm-hmm.
With public transportation, and growing up in the 30s, very few people in our neighborhood had automobiles. So that's the way life was.
If I'm not mistaken, you also have the distinction of having served your country in 3 different wars. World War II, Korean War, and you flew in Vietnam?
Vietnam, yes.
Mm-hmm. Wow. How about that, folks? And what they tell me is you made the transition to different vehicles, different planes.
Oh, yes. Well, the thing is, when I went back I got out in the service in '46, went back in '48. But then integration was taking place. So I figured I needed a backup to my pilot. So I went to electronics school for 10 months and learned about electronics on aircraft, radar and whatnot. And I didn't get to the all-weather fighters that I wanted, I'd planned on. I was sent to a B-29 outfit on Guam as a maintenance officer, but also a pilot. I learned to fly the B-29. And so when the Korean War started, I flew as a co-pilot for 45 missions over there. So it was, but that was the first job after racial integration took place. And we had some bumps in the road for about 3 or 4 years during that period of racial integration.
P-51D, I think, A-33, tall in the saddle, I think.
Tall in the saddle, yes. Now that's another story. A-33 was a beautiful airplane. It had a tall in the saddle and had this Varga girl on it. A skin-tight jumpsuit with 2 pistols. And the plane belonged to one of the ops officers, Wendell Lucas. Now Wendell Lucas had flown his missions and could have gone home. Oh, first let me go back. Squadrons have more pilots than airplanes. And you always see these pilots with their airplanes. But the airplanes belong to the older pilots. We've got pilots who've been in the squadron the longest. And those of us who come in late have no airplanes, say. And when the mission's scheduled, the pilots who own airplanes, they assign those airplanes. And the rest of us take what's left over, say. But I had flown, I guess, about 5 or 6 missions. And Wendell Lucas had flown his missions, but he still owned the airplane since he was over there. So one day he said, George, you want to fly my airplane, A-33? And I flew most of my missions in that airplane. He thought it was his airplane, but I knew it was mine from then on.
Leo, I want to come over to you and ask you, in your opinion, for our listeners and viewers, why were the Red Tails so successful on their escort missions? Why do you think so?
If you had to deal with our commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, you would readily understand it's easier to deal with the Germans than to deal with him. He said if you left the formation to go chasing after some enemy planes, you'd be court-martialed.
Whoa.
So we stayed with the airplanes. We're staying with the airplanes. We had the best record of any fighter group in the 15th Air Force in terms of lost planes, lost bombers. We didn't have aces because we stayed with the airplanes. Some of our guys, had they gone chasing airplanes, might have had more victories. But if you had to stay with the bombers, that was your primary job. There were 10 people in each one of those bombers, only 1 person in each one of those German fighters. You do the math. The bomber's a lot more expensive than a fighter.
And I understand that you looked for the brightest red paint you could find to paint your plane.
Well, there were 4 P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force. The 31st Fighter Group had candy stripe tails, red stripes on the plane. The 52nd Fighter Group had yellow tails. The 325th Fighter Group had yellow and black checkerboard tails. We had red tails. Each one of our squadrons had different trim tabs to differentiate them. The reason for the difference in colors, particularly with the tail colors, was so that the planes with whom we were escorting, the bombers, would know who was who. When we first started out, they saw the red tails and they thought they were great being escorted by the red tails, but they didn't know we were black. I defy you to identify a person that's got goggles on, oxygen mask, and gloves, and there's no way you can ask. You can't even see his ears, because he's covered with the helmet. And so the only way they found out we were black is when someone came to the base to thank us for it.
Wow.
Oh, just might add on.
George?
That, 15th Air Force assigned the colors. And most of the groups just had the rudder with the colors on it. But the 332nd painted the whole rear end of the airplane. You might say red, so it was very distinctive.
Yeah.
What was that flight like, the 51C, the Mustang? What was that first flight like for you, Leo?
My first flight? Spurgeon Ellington had completed a tour of duty, and he was ready to go home, and they told him to take me up on my orientation flight. I thought I was a pretty hot pilot, you know. I wasn't going to let him get below me. And so we went and did everything we could. We had a great time. We came back and we buzzed the field. We stayed up high enough so that our wings would clear the airplanes on the ground. And then we came back and we did rolls over the field. And when I came in, I was feeling great. I had a wonderful flight. And my crew chief said, "You're in trouble." I said, "What did I do?" "You're not supposed to do a roll unless you get a victory. Colonel Davis wants to see you and Lieutenant Ellington." I said, "Uh-oh." We got Colonel Davis. He got us in there and braced us up. And he went up one side and down the other. He fined Spurgeon Ellington $125. That's a month flight pay.
Whoa.
And he put me on probation. Well, that
For doing a roll?
Yeah. And, but the thing is, see, he came back, and he was just a colonel then. He got promoted to lieutenant general, and then he died, and he never took me off probation.
All right, both of you get the same question, beginning with George. Leo, you get to think about your answer a little more. 3 wars, you're in combat, you're in different situations, different vehicles you're flying. What's the most memorative combat mission you ever flew, George? Does one stand out?
The most memorable.
As a red tail pilot, what was your most memorable encounter?
I don't remember now. They all fade into main things I got back, say. And, the only one was the one I was hit once. Only time a plane I was in was hit on a strafing mission. But the reason I noticed it was that down at your feet, it's dark under there. But suddenly this light was down there. A shell had gone through and opened up the side. But that was the only time any airplane I was in was hit. So,
When you fly that many missions at that time and all these different wars, I was wondering, they didn't talk about, you know, PTSD and all of that, but did you ever relive these things in your mind?
no. That's the reason they get you 18, young and stupid, you know. You know, I'm 19 years old overseas, and someone says, "Fly this mission," sure. A guy 45 would have said, "That's dangerous," you know. And so you get used to it after a while.
Leo, tell us about a memorable combat mission.
Well, I had an instance one time. I was at Air Force Association Council meeting in Fort Lauderdale, and they had a guest speaker who was a retired colonel from our local area. I won't mention his name. And he, like George, had flown as a fighter pilot in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Before his presentation, he came over to me. He said, "Leo, were you ever stationed at Ramitelli?" That's our base in Italy. I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you remember a mission with 3 P-51s and a P-38? Well, we had a lot of those. You know, we had 129 missions escorting photo reconnaissance planes, either P-38s or British Mosquitoes. So I said, "But I was on one, and we encountered a couple of jets." He said, "You were?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, I was the P-38 pilot." I said, "You were?" He said, "Yeah." "Well, I talk about you like a dog." He said, what happened? This was April 1st, the day that George and his guys were going over to Yugoslavia, shooting up a lot of airplanes, and we had to go to Prague. Well, we had 75-gallon tanks for that particular mission. On March 24th, the week before, was the longest mission of the 15th Air Force to Berlin. And they had 110-gallon tanks for that mission. And so on that mission, they destroyed 3 German Me-262s. They probably destroyed 2 other Me-262s, and they probably destroyed an Me-163 jet planes. No one ever talks about the probables. And they damaged 3 Me-262s. So we got to Prague. This guy was very talkative on the way up. And so we got to Prague, we were ready to turn back with our 75-gallon tanks. He said, go a little bit further. We said, okay. We went a little bit further. 5 minutes later, we were ready to go back. He said, go a little bit further. We said, okay. Well, the third time he wanted to go a little further, we said, look, if you're going to go further, you're going to be on your own. We're not going to lose 3 P-51s so you can get some pictures. Someone said, bogey, 12 o'clock high. Here come 2 German Me-262s out to greet us. He panicked. He said, what did I do? He said, take the number 2 slot and keep quiet. He took the number 2 slot, and we turned around. We were heading home as fast as we could, about 350 miles an hour with our noses dipped. And we had wing tanks on, naturally. And these 2 jets came over, and they started flying in circles about 5,000 feet above us. Well, I was told we had the best airplane in the sky in Europe, and then look what happened, you know. Next thing you know, they come down to about 1,200 feet. I could see the guys. And so then they came on the approach to attack us. As they came in, we figured, well, we had a chance to shoot them down, because as they were over 100 miles an hour faster than we were. And so we figured as they closed, if we did one of these things, we'd be on their tails and have a chance to shoot them down. We dropped tanks. As soon as we dropped tanks, they broke off. We went on home. The rest of the trip was uneventful. This P-38 pilot didn't say anything. So at the meeting after, he says, you know, I always wondered why they had you guys escort me, because there was a P-38 group north of me. They could have escorted me. Yeah, but we got your ass home safe, didn't we? 2008, he's still worried about these black boys escorting him back in 1945.
It's a good story. Everyone is wanting to know, too, about the history, and we'll get back to some of the stories, but you know, coming up as young pilots, it took an embarrassment, a lawsuit, to finally have the Supreme Court say, and then presidents said, we have to have equal opportunities for these brave men to serve their country. What was it like? Did you both think at times this is never going to happen for us in this generation? Were you surprised when you were finally allowed to fly? For you,
Well,
George,
What
first.
do you mean allowed to fly? You
Well,
know,
at first, because they weren't going to allow, you know, black pilots. And
Yeah.
so what I'm talking about, there was a lawsuit filed by an individual, from what I read today, and then they finally changed the rules and policies so that African Americans could fly. Were you surprised when it happened?
Well, yes, I was surprised, but that happened before I had an urge to fly. So, see, I was still in high school when that came down.
You didn't have the dream then when you were in high school?
No, I just wanted to go into the service anywhere, but I wasn't too anxious to go into the service either. I only weighed 129 pounds.
129 pounds?
Well, I was in high school, yeah.
Okay.
I graduated in June of '42. I turned 17 that same month. And I was no heavyweight at all. So.
The military, did they change the rules to allow 17-year-olds to come in? Did they lower the age or what?
No. In 1943, I graduated from high school in June of '42. I turned 17 that same month. But in the beginning of '43, the Army and the Navy, they needed people. See, the draft was taking people, and they're running out of people coming in. Said if you're 17 and a high school graduate, you could take the exam. I took the exam, passed it, and I was sworn in as a private in the Army Reserve. Then they sent me home because I was too young to go into service at 17. But I didn't have to register for the draft because I was already in the reserve. See, so when I went in, I just went straight into pilot training, the road for pilot training. So that was it.
What was Tuskegee like? I think, Leo, you told me in a conversation we had once, I stayed on the base, I didn't run into some of the trouble that others ran into. Tell us about the experience. What was it like there?
Tuskegee was an oasis, like an oasis in a desert. South was a desert. If you got to Tuskegee on the base, you were safe. And being from Boston, I wasn't anxious to test the laws of the South. So I stayed on the base.
Yeah. You went to work for the United States government in other capacities after 1984, right? That's when you stopped?
No, when I get out of the service.
In 84?
No, 60.
60,
Well,
but the notes I had.
George and I got out at the same time in 1946. And George later went back in, but I tried to get to a jet school and couldn't qualify. We had time in fighters, but you had to have at least a year of college. And like George, I just graduated in 42. And so I went back to school, and I did my undergraduate at the University of Mass, and I started in June of 47 and graduated in 50. And then I went out to the University of Nebraska, got a master's in agricultural economics. And I ended up working for the United States Department of Agriculture for over 30 years as an economist, and I ended up as a director of planning for regulatory agencies, Food Safety and Quality Service, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. I had interesting careers in between.
Yeah, very dynamic difference here. Did you ever envision that your life would go in that direction when you were young?
No. As a matter of fact, that when someone said, "How did you end up in the field of agriculture coming from Boston?" Well, in primary training, some of you folks that are flying probably know this experience. The farmers are always complaining about these pilots flying over their fields and disrupting their cows and their chickens. And am I right? But anyhow, when I started school, I took a class in agricultural economics. Originally, I wanted to major in business administration. But I said, agricultural economics is the business of agriculture, And I said, this is pretty interesting. Coming from Boston, I didn't know which end of the cow mooed out of, so I said, I'd take this class. But anyhow, I ended up in that field, and hey, who came up with a publication in 2008, 101 top industry experts, and they had 4 pages for me, so I guess I did okay.
George. I got to get a copy of the book because it's got to be quite historic. George, 1945, Italy, you fly, I think, 21 combat missions that year.
21 combat missions,
Yeah. Tell us about that experience.
Well, 19 years old, that was big. I loved it. I flew as a wingman. I was a junior in the squadron, but I loved it. It's a beautiful airplane, and it did everything you wanted it to do. You could go as fast as you wanted to go. It was just a delightful airplane. At 19 years old, second lieutenant, flying a 51, you couldn't beat that.
Amen. I'm curious because by that time, the war is winding down. Italy's on its knees. How much resistance is there in the air from the Nazis? Are they pretty well spent?
That's the situation. By the time I got over there, the German Air Force had been more or less neutralized, you might say. And we didn't run into too many. Only planes I saw on some of our missions were basically the 262s. But I don't remember any of them attacking us, just a couple. If they would come in, we'd turn into them. So they would take off. The only time I fired my guns was on strafing missions. And that's it, so.
George, I was told in preparation for this that you had an incident once where a base commander denied you access. Does that ring a bell?
I had that occasion. I also had an occasion flying B-29s where I was on a flight crew in the 28th Bomb Squadron. And he became the new squadron commander in May 1950. And I found soon that he wouldn't talk to me except in the line of duty, having to do with as a maintenance officer. That's the only time they talked to me, having to do with my maintenance job, or electronics on airplanes. But I was on a flight crew, and I found he wouldn't talk to me, and so I adjusted to that. And then the Korean War started, and we flew our first mission on the 30th of June, 1950, over Korea. We were on Guam, moved to Okinawa, and started flying up over Korea. And on a 7th mission on the 12th of July, we'd gotten to the airplane. As co-pilot, I get in my seat and go through my checklist. The aircraft commander walks around the airplane, goes through his checklist. Then we get in the airplane, start engines, and take off based on the time. Well, while I was in my seat, I heard this voice say, "Hardy, get down out of the airplane." I looked out, it was Colonel Miller, so I got down. And he replaced me. He didn't want me flying, see. So, of course, I was depressed, of course. And, but later that day, he saw me, and I tried to avoid him, but he walked up to me, and he put his hand on my shoulder to stop me, because I wanted to keep walking. He let me know that that airplane had been shot down over Korea, the one with my crew on it, see. And because I was upset with him because I liked my crew. I figured if I had been there, it might not have happened. Well, 2 of the people were captured by the North Koreans. They had to bail out, and the rest got back okay. And the first thing the aircraft commander said, "George, if you'd been with me, I don't think it would have happened." See, because my job as a co-pilot would be to check the gunners, make sure they alert, they check the guns, make sure they all fire, and be ready. But I wasn't there. He had a new co-pilot who he hadn't flown with before. And so it was the first B-29 shot down over Korea. Now, that Colonel Miller, that was in 1950. 10 years later, I ended up going to Plattsburgh as an Armored Electronics Maintenance Squadron commander. This is in Sept. And he was my wing commander, the same officer, say. And I was with him for over 2.5 years up there. And it ended up the best 2.5 years as far as my career in the service were concerned, was under him the second time. Especially, but you know, you have mixed feelings. The day he walked up, in those days when you leave work, you always go to the bar and have a brew and then go home, say. I'm sitting at the bar and he walks in, "George and I fought the Korean War together," say, and announced to everybody. Well, I'm thinking to myself, you SOB, you know. But I hated to leave him. But right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, I was fortunate in the service. I got 2 engineering degrees. And right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Institute of Technology contacted me to go to graduate school in a new program, Reliability Engineering. And I took it and went for 18 months and got my master's. I got my BS there in 1957, then I got a master's in systems engineering at Institute of Technology. And that prepared me well for life after I got out of the service. So I'm very fortunate as far as the service is concerned.
You retired in 71, I think, right?
71, yeah.
Okay. Is the Vietnam flying experience vastly different for you than the Korean flying experience? I'm curious.
Vastly different, yes. You see, in 1962, I was a squadron commander, maintenance squadron commander. I had no reason to fly except to keep current and get flight pay. I was flying a T-33, a jet, 2-seater jet. That was just delightful, just to get my flying time. But they put me into what was Code 3. I get my flight pay, but I don't have to fly, except take a physical every year and be ready to call back to the cockpit. I was in that for 7 years. And in end of 1969, they called me back to the cockpit to fly a AC-119 gunship. I don't know whether people know what a gunship AC-119 is. That was a troop carrier plane with a eggshell fuselage, twin booms, carried 42 paratroopers. They could let them out 2 at a time. They made a gunship out of that. It was twin engine, but they had 2 models, the G and K. The K model is the one I flew. It was so heavy with guns and armament that had to add 2 jet engines. So you had 4 engines, 2 props and 2 jets flying that airplane over Vietnam, see. And so I had to check out in that, and I went over Vietnam as lieutenant colonel then. And there are 11 people on that crew, and you fly a pylon around the target in the center. All your rounds are supposed to hit in that little circle in the center, and you fly around it. So 11 people on that crew. You have an infrared operator who picks up the target. We only flew at night. We flew so low, we're vulnerable, so at night, we were protected, say. But the infrared operator pick up the target trucks going through the Ho Chi Minh Trail and whatnot. That's what we're looking for. And it was 11 people on the crew. You had 4 gunners who handled the guns, but the person who actually fired the guns was the pilot flying the airplane. He had to, say, you have to fly it with the gun sight right here. And you see 2 crosshairs in there when you get it lined up, and the co-pilot maintains the altitude on the stick, say, on the wheel. And when you get it right, then you fire and shoot trucks. And that was it. So it was quite an experience. So.
When you came home from the Vietnam War, were you treated poorly or were you treated well? We hear the horror stories about the way that Americans treated those who went to serve for their country.
No. I was treated well, except I didn't get the right assignment. So I got assigned to the IG office. And after spending a year in Vietnam, and then come back to get that, you go out for an assignment, IG office, 4-6 weeks at a time. Well, heck, that's worse than Vietnam, say. Because you got to write up a report when you get back, say. So that's one of those things. So.
We're going to come to the audience for questions in just a moment, but first I'm going to call upon Mike McKenzie to help me with this next segment.
Oh.
Let's get this story now, Mr. Levy.
Oh, okay. Sure.
I want to bring your microphone over. Let's do the story for the audience of how this
Okay,
happened.
well, I can sit next to Mr. Levy?
Well, you can
Or you
sit
want
or
me
you
to-
can stand there. I wanted to make sure Mr.
Okay,
Levy had a microphone.
Yeah.
Because you took us through this story. Go ahead.
Yes, well, after Colonel Gray instigated this thing about monument, I got it in my head that I was going to get this monument done. I initially went to a corporation, I won't mention the name, but we were working on it together and they kind of backed up on the project. So I still wanted to do it. I reached out to Mr. Levy and he said that he still wanted to do it. And at that very time, there was an honor being given to the airmen at the NBAA convention in Orlando. That was back in about 2-3 years ago.
Mr. Levy, let's hear your thoughts on what
Yeah.
that process is. He giving us the straight story here?
Well, almost. Almost.
See, they remember more than me.
But what happened with Mike was I had been approached to get the information on it. I'm in that business, in that industry, in the awards industry. So I went ahead and studied up on it, got a whole lot of ideas, got some of my suppliers to quote me and make designs. When we got around to doing it, came back and somebody else was handling it instead of Mike at the time. And they had said, well, it was going to be about $100,000 they were going to raise. And well, somebody was promised $100. This is after 7 months. And here I'm sitting there saying, after all this work, and I got the designs and everything else, they got $100. So Mike come to me and he says, what about you and I just doing it? And I said, well, that's fine with me. Let's do it. So we got together, and with somebody else we went to the Science Center in Orlando, and there, Joanne Newman, and
Very good.
yeah, and anyway, they said, yeah, I guess it'd be nice to have it here, and we could put it out in front of the Science Center, got a room for it, so we just went ahead and got it made, put it up, and they dedicated it. It was a great lot of fun. My brother had been in the Air Force in World War II, and I really loved my brother. And he was a ferry command pilot before the war started, flying planes over to England. And I thought, well, this would be an honor to him too. So that's what we did, and I was happy as could be about it.
Very good. There are a couple of other people we want to touch upon for the audience to know here.
Yes.
Your story, young man. Thank you for being with us. Mike, you brought him in?
Yes, this is John Gage. John is our chapter president for the General Chappie James chapter of Tuskegee Airmen. There are 52 chapters currently across the country, and our chapter resides in Central Florida. So I wanted to make sure John joined us and his lovely wife, Mary Ann. So this is John Gage.
Tell us a little bit about your story, John.
Well, there's not much to tell. I'm not an original, that's for sure. I followed 2 uncles and a cousin to Tuskegee. And my class was what you call tweeners, because we would transform from props to jets and from guns to rockets.
Wow.
So we were the early going from props to jets group. And my uncle, my oldest uncle, and Chappie James were classmates at Tuskegee. They were in the first class of the CPTP program, 1939. So Tuskegee Institute became the family business, so that's where we went to school.
Very good. Thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for coming as well. Want to bring this over? This man does exercise every day, and he does a walk at least a mile, right?
He gives hugs.
And he gives hugs. That's what keeps him young. Bob Hughes is with us, and the story here with Bob.
You know, I didn't know this until we were actually attending a funeral last year for Hiram Mann, who was also with us. And Bob and I were standing outside in the parking lot as the body was being brought out, and we're talking. So Bob said, yeah, you know, Mike, I was a flight instructor for Hiram back then. I said, you were what? And so we got on this long discussion, and then I went and started looking through the records a little bit more and found all this really cool history on Bob Hughes. But Bob Hughes was one of the flight instructors for the original Tuskegee guys down there in Tuskegee, Alabama.
And I wanted to ask you the same question. What was it like living in Tuskegee at that time?
Well, to tell the truth, we couldn't live in Tuskegee. There wasn't any place to go in Tuskegee, and being a white instructor, I could not live on the base. I went there. My story is I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I loved to play football, and I liked to fix cars, and I liked girls. But
it's about right.
Not really in that order, but anyway, I had a guy, we played good football. He was a tackle, I was an end. He was big, I was fast. And he was black and I was white, and we were very good friends. And all of a sudden, they drafted me, and they sent me down to Fort Ord, and I took examinations, and they said, well, we're going to ship you to Nashville. I said, what for? And they said, so you can qualify to be a pilot. I said, I don't want to be a pilot, I want to be a machinist. So they, anyway, took me to Nashville, and I was one of the first ones that qualified for pilot. And I went down to Maxwell Field in Alabama, and went to ground school, and that really pegged me because I wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer when I was in high school, and I really had to buckle down to get into my training to be a pilot. And I really didn't want to be a pilot, I wanted to be a machinist until I got to primary training, took my first flight, and I said, to hell with being a machinist, I want to fly.
Good for you, Bob.
Anyway, I graduated and from Napier Field in Dothan, Alabama, and there we flew T-6s and P-40s. And P-40 was my airplane. I really liked to fly the P-40. And so anyway, there was 162 pilots graduated, and 160 went overseas, and I was left behind to be an instructor pilot.
Oh, wow.
And I hated it. But I wanted to go over there and fight the war like the rest of them. But anyway, one morning I got orders, and it says you're going to Tuskegee, Alabama. Where the hell is Tuskegee? Anyway, I didn't have a car, I didn't have any money, rode a bus all the way from Tuskegee up, from Napier Field up to Tuskegee. It was 7:30 at night. I went up and had a taxi ride, and I said, here's my orders. I've been traveling all day. I'm tired. I want to get on the base and go to the BOQ. And this big sergeant said, sir, I can't let you on the base. And I said, why? Here's my orders. I'm assigned to Tuskegee Army Airfield. And he said, you can't come on. I said, why? He says, "'Cause you're white."
Wow.
Anyway, I went back and got a hotel, and the next day saw Colonel Parrish, who was the base commander, and he set me straight. He says, "Well, there's some things you can do on base and things you can't do on base. You can come on the base and fly advanced single-engine trainers." I said, "What else?" He says, "That's it. You can't go to the PX. You can't go to the. You can't live in the BOQ. You can't."
So you had your own discrimination for the
And
time. Being white.
I said, "What the hell's? Excuse me. What the heck's going on?
Cut out what the.
Do we get eek on that?"
Yeah.
Anyway, Ray was my good buddy. I went to his house, he went to my house. We were just good friends, and I could see no reason, just because somebody was black and one was white, why the problem there in Tuskegee.
There you go.
And it was anyway. I wanted to say something. I told my wife that I was going to say this, because I said, "Don't you tell anybody else." And she says, "Well, because 1 week from today, Pat and I will be married 71 years.
All right. God bless you. There is at least one resident of Tuskegee here. This gentleman, Murray. And I don't know if I can reach you, but I just wanted you to let the folks know. Did you grow up there?
You spoiled my surprise.
Oh. What was it like? Is what the gentleman said correct?
First of all, I want to salute all of the Tuskegee Airmen for what they did for our country and what they're continuing to do for our country. Thank you. Yes, we do have that in common. I was born in Tuskegee in January of 1942, so I didn't get a chance to meet you then. But it did kind of interesting enough when I heard Mark say that you all were on the base most of the time. I wondered if that was something that was a request, an order, or you just did not feel comfortable going into town.
Didn't want to go in town.
He didn't want to go into town. If we can pick up what Leo said, and this is where we're going to begin the audience participation part. Both John and Molly have microphones. If you raise your hand, we're going to come to you. So raise your hand while we're getting a question answered. We'll find another person for the next question. But gentlemen, were you afraid to go off base? Leo?
I wasn't afraid to go off, but had no interest in going off because there was nothing to go off for. I used to go up to the Veterans Hospital, and we had some friends up there, or go on the campus. But as far as downtown Tuskegee, there was nothing there for black people.
Downtown
That's correct.
Tuskegee.
Nothing
Sure.
down there for you. No places you could go really
Yeah.
and enjoy yourself. I think I went into Tuskegee once and with some of the guys, and that's about it. And that's the way it
One of
was
the problems,
in the South.
they had, Macon County was a dry county, and the sheriff spent overtime checking cars, going back to the base, make sure that they didn't have any good beverages.
No kidding. We're going to look up in the audience. I don't know where my helpers are. Let's begin with where Molly is. Your question now for our guest tonight.
Yes, two quick questions. First, going from the Allison to the Merlin, is that what you really think made the P-51 the D model, that is, the aircraft that it ended up being after the war? And second, I flew with the 50th Attack Fighter Wing at Hahn Air Base, and the most I'd ever do is maybe a 4v4 at the merge, and I'm just wondering how you guys kept everyone in sight, trying to keep, the bombers and then your lead or wingmen, let alone the enemy, all in sight. Thank you.
I might add, as far as that, the P-51 was built for the British to start with. Mm-hmm. It was the A-36. It was a low-altitude attack airplane. They came over here early part of the war and wanted us to build P-40s, but North Americans said they would build a fighter, a better fighter, quicker than setting up a P-40 line. And it was the English that took the airplane to England, and they put the Merlin engine in it over there. And that changed the whole characteristic of the airplane, because the Merlin engine had a good supercharger, and it performed well at all altitudes, where the Allison engine lost efficiency as it went up. So the British put the Merlin engine in the P-51. And,
all of our B, C, and D models had the Merlin engine.
no.
Let's come back over here. John, you have a question? And we'll look for anyone on this side next.
Hi, I have two questions. First one, what was it like seeing the ME-262s for the very first time in the air? Because I know that you guys knew about it well before you ever saw them. What was it like seeing jet engines instead of propellers?
Like being what?
Like seeing a jet. What was it like seeing a jet the first time? They were fast. I mean, you know, there was nothing you could do. It was 100 miles an hour more faster than you were. And fortunately, Adolf Hitler was using them as bombers to begin with, and he didn't start using them as fighters until too late.
You had a second part, very quickly?
Yes, it's more for Mr. Gray. If my memory serves me correctly, is the P-51C at Kermit Weeks' place, is that a model off of your aircraft?
That plane was modeled exactly after the aircraft flown by Lee Archer. My plane was a C model. Mine was number 2. And Lee Archer was in 302nd Fighter Squadron. My plane was owned by Major Madison, who had moved up to group headquarters. And my first mission was to have been to Berlin, but Major Madison wanted to fly it. And when a major and a lieutenant compete, you know what happens. But when I was coming, we came home, George and I left to go overseas March 1st. We arrived at the base March 14th, 2 days after the last pilots from 302nd Squadron, which had been deactivated, had departed. George and I left Italy October 1st on Levi Woodbury, and we landed.
No, we don't. No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't go back with me. That's right, you came back early.
I left in August.
Yeah, well, this is a popular misconception. A lot of people have said that the Tuskegee Airmen were not welcomed home when they came back. And they got home and they had a lot of derogatory remarks, you know, sort of demeaning. But when the 332nd left, we had a Liberty ship to ourselves. When we landed at New York Harbor, they had a boatload of women that come out to greet us, and but we couldn't reach them because they were on different boats. But we landed.
Who worked that out?
I don't know. But we landed in New Jersey, and they had entertainers to give us a welcome ashore, one of whom I recall was Josh White, who was a famous folk singer. Those of you who are old enough or know something about folk singing would know who Josh White was. He came up on deck with me and a couple of the other guys. There were about 3 of us from the 100th Fighter Squadron. We were the last ones to leave. And he invited us to attend his performance at Cafe Society Uptown. Well, a couple of us decided to take him up on his offer. But we couldn't leave the base. We had to stay on the base until we got cleared. And so we got in this long, long line. There was a hole in the fence across the street from the provost marshal's office that you had to crawl through to get off the base. And we crawled through the hole to get off to the base, and we went down to see Josh White. It wasn't so bad, but one of the fellows said, "I've got 3 sisters, why don't we take them with us?" Well, we didn't know any better, we were young. We took them to the Cafe Society Uptown. And we got ready to leave. We want, go someplace else. And the waiter said, "Look, you guys got over $40 worth of unused drinks." We haven't had, yeah, but there's a cover charge. Wow, cover charge? We didn't know anything about a cover charge. So we had to stay there all night.
Wow. I'm sorry, how did you get out of that?
Huh?
How did you get out of that? $40 cover, Joe.
Well, we had to stay and drink it up.
Drink it up.
Yeah.
Wow. We're back up here, and Molly, and your question.
First, I would like to say it's an honor to be speaking with you, and I have two questions. The first one is, do you guys feel like you fought two different wars, the one in Europe against Nazis, and then one here in America with a segregated home?
Yes.
The question was, you were fighting two wars.
It's a double victory. I assume most of you are familiar with the movie Red Tails.
Yeah.
If you get the DVD, if you haven't already, but if you get the DVD Red Tails, get the Blu-ray version, and there's a 90-minute companion documentary titled Double Victory. And in that movie, you'll see George and I and a lot of the other fellows being interviewed along with the old young folks. These guys that played in the movie were older than we were. As a matter of fact, George was younger than me, but there was a fellow in my squadron was celebrating his 18th birthday. And Colonel Davis found out about it, and he said, well, court-martial him. I said, court-martial him? Yeah, he lied about his age. Well, how are you going to explain that he flew 2 missions before he was 18 years old? Ground him until he turns 18.
We're back over here now.
Hello. My question to you is, what inspired you to serve in the Air Force when at times your neighbors or the law would not even support African Americans?
What inspired?
Well, we didn't have much choice. The draft, you don't know about the draft, was going around getting everybody. And I left, I was called May 24th. And we had to, when you took the test to become a pilot, I took it in November '42, but I wasn't called until May. Unlike George, he was enlisted because he was underage, but I was already 18. They didn't call me until the day I got called up, but I had to report to my draft board. And so technically, you're drafted. Actually, you volunteered, or actually you're drafted, but technically you volunteered. And you become a quota, part of the quota for your draft board. A week after I left, I tried to get one of my buddies to sign up to become an aviation cadet with me. And he said, no. A week after I left, the draft board went through my neighborhood with a vacuum cleaner and took everybody. In August, this fellow I tried to get to come into service with me found himself in England. I know he wished he'd been with me down at Tuskegee.
But actually, you talk about the war, it was our country too. Yeah. And we had to fight for our country. So that's the other side of it.
Way in the back. Thank you for being with us tonight. Your question.
I'm Reverend Randolph Bracey, and I'm Distinguished Professor at Bethune-Cookman University.
Thank you for being here, sir.
And I'd like to share a story of a Daytona Beach connection to the Tuskegee Airmen, and also a little short vignette that might be of interest to you. First of all, Daytona Beach had a lot to do with the establishment of the Tuskegee Airmen because of Mary McLeod Bethune, who was a strong companion and friend to Eleanor Roosevelt. And it was Mrs. Bethune who convinced Eleanor Roosevelt to convince her husband, who was President of the United States of America, to give them a chance. And Eleanor took a flight, as I understand it, as the history tells it, either with Chappie James, and convinced her that this should be done. That's in our archives across town. So it needs to be known that right here in this town, there is a Daytona Beach connection with the Tuskegee Airmen. And had it not been for Mrs. Bethune inveighing upon Eleanor Roosevelt, who inveighed upon her husband, and having either, I think it was Chappie James, and I just want that to be known, that little known Black history fact. The second thing, I must just tell you about my experience coming through Jim Crow in junior high school. I'm a native Floridian, born and reared in Jacksonville, Duval County. And it was Chappie James's brother, they both were from Pensacola, who was a principal in Jacksonville, and this was during the era of Jim Crow and segregation. And he invited his brother. And if you knew anything about Chappie James, he was about 6'3", very strapling, very big man. And he came to our high school, junior high school, if you will. There was no such thing as middle school then. And he invited, both brothers were called Chappie. They were out of Pensacola. Anyway, they allowed us to take a bus, several buses, if you will, yellow buses, school buses, to go out to Cecil Field in Jacksonville. And if you can imagine, all black kids, somewhere around 55, 56, to see this colonel, this strapling colonel, get in this jet plane, scoot down the gangway and fly and take off, and then come and land. So I saw Chappie James fly. So I say that. I know they talk about red tails, and that's great, but I can say as a young, fledgling youngster to lay hands on greatness. And so I salute you, the men of the Tuskegee Airmen, and for the great work that you've done, and I bless God for you. And I thank God for what you're doing. I'm very much concerned because I have seen now your ranks beginning to thin. And it concerns me. And I don't know how we extend that, except through your books and through the movies and what have you. But it concerns me because you have such a great legacy. And I just must share that with you, those two vignettes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and give our regards to Dr. Jackson. Let's come over here to this side, and Molly. Hands off the microphone. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I teach at a local high school, and I run an aerospace academy, and so I have a lot of those 18 young and dumb guys. If you could
so
share...
teacher saying young and dumb?
It was their words, right? If you could give them advice that I could pass on to them, what would you tell them?
Hang in there and persevere.
Short and sweet. Over here now.
I'm Sam, and my great-grandpa, he fought in World War II. I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Harris. Do you know him? Did you know him? Well, did you know him?
Sam, do you know Harris?
I knew somebody named Harris, but I'm not sure it was your grandfather.
Yeah.
In World War II.
How old are you?
12.
12. Probably one of our younger questioners. You know him, boys?
I knew somebody named Harris, but I'm not sure it was her
What's the
grandfather.
name?
Harris.
Harris.
Harris, that's a common name.
I took a shot. We're back over here now.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Miguel. I have one question. So, the big radiator, the Merlin engine, and flying full throttle against the enemy aircrafts, was the engine getting really hot something that you would talk about at the end of your day?
Engine get hot.
I'm not sure.
My engine never got hot.
I'm not sure I could
I'm not
understand
sure I
the question.
understood the question.
Could you repeat the question, please? I'm sorry. With the echo, we weren't able to make it out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, with flying against enemy aircrafts, was the engine overheating because of going full throttle the entire time? Was that a factor?
Was it a factor of the engine overheating?
No. Normally, the cooling system would take care of that.
Yeah.
The cooling system.
Back over here. We'll try to get to you in the middle right after this gentleman with the red shirt. Go ahead, sir.
Once again, gentlemen, thank you for everything you've done for this great nation. I'm in Navy ROTC at the school here, and I see there are other ROTC people here. Do you have any advice for any future officers going into the military?
You're a career officer. You go there.
Any advice for career officers, George?
Well, the thing is, when I was in the service, I understood what my job was. And I worked at that job, made sure it was done. And I didn't, anyway, I made sure it was done, did the best I could do on any job I had, was assigned. And that sort of paid off during my career.
Thank you. There was a gentleman right after. I don't know if we can get to him. Did the microphone go back? Where did it go to? Molly, I don't know if you can reach him. In the middle, it's really tough, but this young man in the white shirt, I wanted to give him a chance. So folks in the middle don't always get to. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. How many years have you served our country? Also,
well, let's do them separately. How many years did they serve their country? For both of you first, how many years in total service to your country? Leo, count all of the years.
I had over 30 years with the United States Department of Agriculture and 41 years with the United States Air Force.
Okay. 71 years. George?
I had 29 years active service with the Air Force, Army and Air Force.
Quickly, second part of your question. Go ahead.
What kind of missions did you fly?
What kind of missions did they fly?
Well, in Europe, we flew with the 332nd high-altitude escort missions, mainly. 15th Air Force, escorting B-24 and B-17s on their bombing missions over Germany. That was the mission assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group in the spring of 1944.
Okay. Looking for a question over here. Is there anyone over here that's going to ask a question? Come over to Arthur, right here. Molly, second row, right there, please. And then we'll come over to John. Arthur, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned the movie with Cuba Gooding Jr. How realistic is that?
Good question.
I'll tell you, that movie pointed out the navigational acumen of the red-tailed pilots. You know, in the early part of the movie, they showed the pilot coming back from a mission, flying over the city in low altitude, and he saw this girl hanging out her laundry. Really? Now, I'm serious. And she blew him a kiss. He went back to the base, and he got a Jeep. He drove that Jeep back to the exact house and apartment. Your GPS couldn't do that well.
We're back over here now.
What type of bullets do you use when you're fighting?
What type of bullets would you use when you were fighting? George, you were telling us, I think the pilot at one point was called...
In the P-51s, you had 50 caliber bullets. 50 caliber, you had, in the D model, you had 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. In the C models, you only had,
we had 4.
2 in each wing,
Yeah.
so 4. So the D model had 6.
Thank you.
Now, when I was flying in Vietnam, our main weapon was a 20 millimeter. That's a much larger shell. 20 millimeter Gatling gun. That's 6 barrels revolving, and that could put out 100 shells a second, or 6,000 rounds a minute. So you only fired in short bursts.
Whoa, I guess. Right over here on the far left. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Naya Butler-Craig, and again, I just wanted to thank you, gentlemen, for all you've done for our country and also for Vision of Flight. I'm a product of Vision of Flight, and I'm a student here as well. And I'm studying aerospace, and I'd just like to say that these two, and Mr. McKenzie actually, are my biggest inspirations to pursue my career in aerospace engineering and eventually joining the Air Force. So thank you.
Thank you. They love you, Mike. We're up here this time.
Hello, sir. First of all, as a French and European citizen, I would like to say thank you for what you have done. My first question is, was it possible for you to go out of the base in Italy? What was the behavior of Italian people when you go outside of the base?
So in Italy, which that would be George?
Yeah.
What was it? Did you go off the base? What was it like?
Off the base?
Well, a lot of them had access to areas around the base, whatnot. And in fact, you became very friendly with them. They would do some laundry for you, things like that. Now, you know, we're supposed to be getting the best of food over there, but we got powdered eggs. And I got my cigarette rations. I didn't smoke cigarettes, so I'd trade my cigarettes to the Italians for eggs. Then I'd go into the cook and have him cook my eggs. But no, the Italians were very friendly people. Had a good time with them. So.
We had some laundry girls that took care of us pretty well. And our flight surgeon had a sanitation project with the folks in Catholica, and they invited my tent mate and I to a county fair, at which I met a young lady, and she asked would I come to her home for dinner. Her daughter, she had a 13-year-old, was studying English, and she wanted to speak English. So I said, okay. And her husband was the vice president of the Bank of Riccione, which was 10 kilometers north of Cattolica. It was just between Cattolica and Rimini. So when we first got there, you go into town and people would run and shut the shutters on the windows and doors as they saw us coming. And they weren't very receptive. So after dinner, the young lady says, why don't we sit out on my veranda so people could see that everything's okay? I said, oh? Yeah, well, what happened, that base had been occupied by a B-25 group of Americans, and they had prepared the local folks for our arrival. And they advised them that we were all barbarians, we all had venereal disease, we had tails, we ate women and children, and so forth, and they wanted to see that I hadn't eaten them. But it was kind of rough. Another time, shortly after we arrived, a whole caravan of horse-drawn wagons came up to the base, and they wanted our buildings. This B-25, somebody in the group had sold them all the buildings on the base. We had to build up our security to let these people know that these were our living quarters. They were not available for them to take away. But we got along great with the local folks once they found out who we were.
You can see it now, the new movie. Leo Gray, After Dark. We're way up here.
As other servicemen, as your fellow servicemen got to know you, were they willing to warm to you, or they weren't willing to get to know you at all, and they just sort of walled themselves off to you?
How did the people react to you after they got to know you?
Just like anyone else.
Mm-hmm. You know, I had a case
once they got to know you,
yeah.
It's just like normal people, just like we mix here, talk to people here, make friends. They're very friendly. When
I went to the Department of Agriculture, I shared a room with a young fellow from Greenville, South Carolina. And he said, you know, Leo, I had never had an opportunity to speak with a black man before. I said, where I come from, if we're walking down the street, you'd get off the sidewalk for me to walk by. That's just the way life was back then. But he and I became very, very close friends over the years. As a matter of fact, he preceded me in the job coordinating agricultural research in the 12 western states, and he recommended me for his replacement.
Over here. There we go, right in the middle. Thank you.
First off, I want to say thank you for your long service to our nation. And the question I just have is from an aviator perspective. Would you guys like to fly in a Messerschmitt 262?
Would I like
Would
to
you
fly
like to fly a Messerschmitt 262?
I don't want to fly anything. Last time I flew an airplane. In 2012, the Collins Foundation asked me to help fly the P-51 from Stewart down to Boca. Well, I didn't take off and land because I'm sitting in the back seat, but I flew it all the way down. But when we got to Boca, the Sun-Sentinel, local newspaper in Fort Lauderdale, had a 2-page article about me and said, I'm going to bring the P-51 down at Boca. So there's a whole lot of people out there to see this red-tailed pilot bring this P-51 in. Well, And we got down there, the pilot got out of the plane and nobody else got out. I'm sitting in the back seat. I'm 88 years old. I'm not 20 anymore. I can't just pounce out. I couldn't figure out how I'm going to get out of the airplane.
Well, I'll fly any flight I can get. I know I got a message from Marvona Welsh today, and she said, don't tell anybody about our secret. Our secret was, some years ago, this is a Red Tail outfit, the Rise Above group, part of the Commemorative Air Force. But they fly the Tuskegee Airmen Red Tail airplane, they have that trailer. And when they would come to Florida, she would notify me, and I could meet with them and spend some days with them. And one day, I got this message, said, we're going to be at New Smyrna Beach, we're going to be at Lakeland, Tallahassee, and where would you like to meet with us? And she said that at New Smyrna Beach, the Golden Knights are going to jump, and they're going to want a Tuskegee Airman to participate in one of the jumps. That's the way it read, you know. And I looked at that, and I said, George Bush does it, you know. So I talked to my sister who lives in Florida. There were 7 of us, just 2 of us left. But she lives in Florida. She's 14 years younger than me. And I told her about it, and she thought I was crazy. George Bush does it, you know. Then I called my daughter in Brooklyn, who thinks she's the head of the family, say. And I let her know, well, I'm thinking about jumping with the Golden Knights. And she almost panicked. George Bush does it, say. So then I finally get on the phone and call Marvona Welsh and says, okay, I'm ready to go. What do I do? You know, the Golden Knights, if you go out with them, it's piggyback. It's with somebody, so it's not that bad. I said, what do I do? She said, what are you talking about? I said, jump at the Golden Knights. No, that's not what I meant, she said. She said, the Golden Knights will make a jump and pass a baton around. And when they land, they'll give it to a Tuskegee Airman. I said, oh, no, I made her feel so bad, you know. Well, when we got to Lakeland, the pilot of the B-29 called me to take me up for a free ride. So I rode in the bombardier seat for the first time. I met hundreds of hours in the B-29. First time I rode in the bombardier seat. And they usually charge with $1,500 for that then, say. So I got a ride in a B-29 Fifi. That's the only B-29 still flying. Incidentally, on that same ride, there was a woman who was 90 years old, white hair. She was no more than about 5'3" or 5'4". And they gave her a free ride. She had flown B-29s in World War II. She was one of the WASP, and they used to fly all the airplanes we had. So that was, I got to ride in the B-29. But this spring, I also got to ride in the P-51. They're in the back seat, the same seat you're talking about. But I was so anxious to get in that thing, I didn't know I was going to fly till that afternoon. And Doug Rosenwald said, okay, we're going up. And getting into the seat, I ripped my arms here and here. And I didn't feel it. At my age, you don't feel some of those things. And I didn't feel it. And when I sat down, I saw the blood all over here. Well, I wasn't going to get out of this seat. I saw a fellow out there with some paper towels, and he gave me some, and I was passionate trying to soak it up. But then Doug Rosenwald saw a Red Cross tent, or a medic tent nearby, and he got the fellow to come up, and I'm sitting in the seat, he patched it up, so he got the flight out of the way. After we landed, then I went to the hospital and got it taken care of. So.
Wow, incredible stories, and I have only time for 2 more questions. The left and then the right. Way in the back, somewhere in the darkness, there is a voice.
Hi, my name's Evan. I first want to say that the Red Tails have been a big inspiration to me, but I was curious, like after World War II, if you ever had a chance to meet any of the German pilots you may have fought against, such as like maybe perhaps meeting like Adolf Gallen or something like that.
Good question. Did you meet any German pilots later?
I met a German pilot up in Nashua, New Hampshire.
In Nashua, New Hampshire?
New Hampshire. It was a flight up there with, I was with the Collins Foundation. And we went up there to some flight up there. And I met Gabby Gabreski and a number of the people. but met a German pilot who flew the 163.
Yeah.
That was a rocket plane.
I met a number of the German aces. They had a gathering of aces in Washington, and I met a number of them. But they had a Air Force ball in Miami one time, and if you ever go to the 8th Air Force Museum down in Savannah, there's a picture and so forth of Charlie Brown. You may have heard of this Charlie Brown B-17, and Franz Stigler, who was a German fighter pilot that did a barrel roll around Charlie Brown's B-17 and waved them on. What happened? They said, "Why didn't you shoot it down?" He said, "Well, I think the 3 engines were out. There were only 3 men alive on the plane, and he didn't think the plane was going to make it, and he just went and left them." But they made it back to England, and they didn't report it. They reported it, but they decided not to report it officially, because had they reported it officially, Stigler would have been executed. But Stigler reported that the plane crashed. Well, at this Air Force ball, here came Charlie Brown and the other 2 crew members and 27 of their offspring that owed their lives to Franz Stigler, who was there at that banquet.
Wow. One more question from our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to know how reliable the P-51 was, and if you had any common mechanical problems.
Any common mechanical problems with the P-51?
I had a good crew chief. I had a good crew chief. When we came back, he bragged that he was the only crew chief bringing both of his pilots home safely.
No mechanical problem, but I see the P-51 did have some characteristics you had to be careful of.
Yeah.
I had a roommate, Herbert Barlin, and I'll never forget the time he came in and landed. He landed and he pushed power forward. Well, the plane flipped, just like that. And that's it. He got out safely because he got out safely okay, but the plane did flip over. It was a loss, so you just learn to fly the airplane. You've got to be careful as airspeed and power, jamming power, the torque will turn the airplane over. So.
Last year, I happened to have been at an Aeromet convention in Orlando, and it brought out the idea of the improved technology in metal fusion. The metal that we had in the P-51 was no comparison to what they have in the aircraft today. I lost a wingman, one of George's classmates. His wing snapped off because the bolt let go. We were in a dive, and he was pulling out a little too tight, and the plane vibrated, and his wing snapped off. But had it had the fusion of the metals today, that never would have happened.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't remember when I've been more informed and entertained by great guests like this. Now, this event will be rebroadcast on WNDB 93.5 FM, AM 1150, the Saturdays of the 12th of September and the 19th of September at 9 a.m., taking the place of our normal bookmark on radio. And it will also be seen as part of the video series of the President's Speaker Series at erau.edu under the President's page. And you'll also find it on our radio website as well, produced by Bob Score. I want to thank Ariel Roy, John Hartsouth, Molly Burnett, Tony Petro up in control, and to our radio producer, Dr. Phil Kincaid. And for all of you making this evening so wonderful, our next event is the 15th. George Will joins us to discuss the next Republican debate. That's the following night, the Iranian nuclear agreement, and baseball from a lifelong and time-suffering Chicago Cubs fan. Free and open to the public. Get here early for a good seat. Once again, our guests, Leo, George, Mike, thank you.